Hey everyone, it is Irene here. I am just popping in live. I haven't been in here live in a while, so thank you for watching and being here. If you're on the recording, I'm just going to let things get going because it takes a second or two for people to find me here. So as we do that, I want to just say to all of you here, if you are new or if you've been around the block a few times with me, thank you for continuing to show up and learn and like and comment and share these videos. This world here on YouTube, for me, it's, I think, close to 14 years. My first video that I posted, and you can go way, way, way back on this channel, was my baby live videos. If you don't know what those are, they're here on YouTube for you to watch. It was an infant that I followed over about a period of 14 months. It was a friend's little one, and we recorded her development from just a month or so old to the point where she was crawling and eventually walking. And the reason why I wanted to film this was to show natural human biological development. And this actually ties in quite beautifully with the nervous system and nervous system regulation in regards to how we raise healthy humans. So I'll just riff on this a little bit and then I'll get into the 21-day flash sale, my 21-day nervous system tune-up, which is my course, my starter course. It's on sale today for 1 day. Normally it's $297 and it's on sale today for $197. We only do this specific sale once a year. So if you have been wondering, not sure, but you want to do it, but you're like, I don't know, today is definitely a day to start. So if you have questions, I've got the chat here. I will keep an eye on the chat. And I'll definitely share some stories. And if no questions come in from YouTube, I've got some questions that were submitted to Instagram and also via email, and I'll get to those. See, we've got about 28 people here. So hello to everybody here. And oh, let me know where you are in the world. I'd love to know. So just pop where you are. If you're a student of mine, let me know. Are you a 21-day student, an SPSM student? Are you one of my senior students? Let me know. But back to this baby live thing, because it's really important. If you followed me for a while, you know I'm a big proponent of ensuring that humans at the beginning are treated really well. I think this goes without saying. However, many of you are probably here because of various traumas when you were young. Now, this doesn't have to be abuse. It doesn't have to be severe stress in terms of being in a war-torn country, not having enough food, having a mother that is unwell, or a situation that's just not good. It could be also due to some of the practices that, let's just face it, the medical industry, the pediatric industry have put upon us to say this is how we need to raise babies in the West. And I'm talking more about this as of late. My husband and I did a parenting masterclass back in, I believe it was May. We're going to do another one in July. It's July 3rd, which is next week. So that'll be a free offering. Please attend that. I'm riffing on this because it's an important topic, is these baby live videos showed when you have a healthy neurological infant, what we need to offer them is freedom to explore. We need an environment that's safe, and we want them to find their spine and their pelvis and their hands and their hips and their feet and their head on their own time. And something that is common in the pediatric world, and even the most well-intentioned parent falls into this trap, is they're told to do something called tummy time, where the baby is put on a flat surface, and the thought is by doing that you will help them learn how to find strength in their cervical spine, in their back. And we just don't want to do that. Now, some people will say, oh, but Irene, a baby is often on a mother's stomach when they're nursing. That's different. This is a situation where you literally are putting an infant on a flat surface, way too young, and asking them to strengthen their muscles. Because of my background in the Feldenkrais method, which is an integral part in all my courses and programs, I know through natural development and studying Magda Gerber and Jean Liedloff and Moshe Feldenkrais, Cheryl Field and Nat Banyal, all of my mentors and teachers and people that came before me, that when you have a healthy neurological infant, when you put them on the floor, and of course you want to be around and nearby and observing them, not meddling with them, they naturally find their spine. They roll, they move, they find ways to sit up, they press. This is what develops their spinal curves. This is what develops their sense of space in the world. This is what allows them to orient naturally with curiosity, with play, with movement. So movement is one of our first teachers as infants. And so in these baby live clips, which I'm talking about, one of the first videos I posted on this YouTube channel, this is a bit of a history lesson, I show you how that happens over many, many, many months. There's two of them. One is called rolling and one is called crawling. So part of our journey of relearning our nervous system and our connection to the world and having agency and strength is in some ways coming back to this infant-like quality. But of course, we can't go back to being infants. But as an adult, as a big person, learning how to use our body in relationship to the ground, in relationship to ease, in relationship to curiosity, to exploration. Now, I start this talk off with this because this is one of the defining differences in my two programs, the 21-Day Nervous System Tune-Up and Smart Body, Smart Mind, which is my 12-week curriculum that we run twice a year at specific times of the year. The next time will be early September. But because of my training in the Feldenkrais method and at this infant neurological, motor neurological development level, there's many ways we could say it, this is integrated into these courses and programs in service of teaching you how to get back into your body, not just from learning breath and learning how to contain and learning how to touch and learning how to orient. Those are all important, but getting back into this developmental motor movement sequence, which is our first teacher with the environment. Of course, our caregivers are, but this is an important part. So I see there's lots of questions coming in here. So what I'll do is, or maybe just lots of comments. I wanted to start with this just to get people in, and we've got about 62 people here now, so thank you. But I wanted to start with that because this is one of the key differentiating factors that shifts us into learning regulation. It isn't just about calming and management strategies. It's about getting into this physicality of our body, and not from an exercise point of view, but from a developmental neurological point of view. Now, one thing that I said earlier is this is for an infant who is neurologically healthy. Now, there's instances where you might have an infant that's born with stroke or cerebral palsy, some form of true developmental disorder. In that case, you might not do this. It might be that you actually have to have some physical manual work. And this is what my colleagues who work with infants in the Feldenkrais method do. They work with infants to teach them how to better find their pelvises, how to find their feet, how to learn how to sit up with more tone in their body. But that's a specialty topic that I am trained to also work with. But in this context, that's not what we get into. So I'm going to go to the top here and see who's here. Let's see. Yeah. Hey, Amy. Great. You enrolled today in the 21-day tune-up. Awesome. Get in there. Now, one thing, as I look through these questions and comments, I'll also speak to what the 21 days is and is not. So while it is called the 21-day nervous system tune-up, you do not have to do it in 21 days. Most of our students take many, many months, weeks to get through the work. It's about self-pacing, but there is 21-day lessons over 21 days. There are audio lessons. I call them neurosensory exercises, which are a blend of my training in somatic experiencing and something called the Feldenkrais method, which I was just talking about. Very basic, but very potent neurosensory exercises. Neurosensory is something I've coined the term to just denote working with our nervous system and working with our bodily sensations. But we're also working with movement, we're working with orienting, we're working with interoception, we're working with attention, and also using our higher brain to notice our habits, our actions, how we may hold our breath, not hold our breath, all of our fight, flight, freeze responses that essentially can get us trapped into a very rigid behavior, posture, thought process, and how we basically function and keep ourselves well. So 21 days, but you do not have to finish it in 21 days. The course is such that you become a member and you are popped into a site. So I'll just talk to the tactical aspects of this course. So you are literally given a username and a password, and it's a beautiful website where you have everything laid out for you, not just the 21 days, but how you ask for help, how you get support. We do have three of my colleagues who are all trained in somatic experiencing and Feldenkrais, who monitor and moderate our forums in the 21 days. So each lesson has an area where you can ask a question about your process. If you're confused about something, if you're not sure, if you have a response that you're not so sure what to do with, they are there to help you through and move through and coach. They're not there to completely hold your hand. You have to self-initiate. But they're there as amazing resources and support. So it's not one of those courses where you just start and you never hear from anybody. They are in there multiple times a week helping you move through the course. And then, of course, there's areas where you can ask general questions. So there's tons of support. Hello from Switzerland. Hello from Oregon, Lithuania, Idaho, Germany. Hello to Ontario. Hi, Chantel. Awesome. You took the plunge and purchased the course today. Thank you super much. And you're nervous to get back into my body from sheer terror, but I know that I have to heal. So good for you. This is good bravery. And, you know, this idea of terror is a reality for many of us. And it's nothing to be ashamed of. A lot of us had terrible childhoods. A lot of us had decent childhoods and we're still struggling, and it's confusing. And this goes back to infancy. This goes back to what were our parents able to offer us when we were young, and what could they not offer us? Essentially, we can only offer to a child what we can offer ourselves. So if we are shut down, frozen, or activated and anxious, that's what the little one learns. This is how we transfer our nervous system physiology to our young. So we're in a really interesting time right now in history, I think, to everybody here, and that my parents didn't know about this stuff when they were raising me. We didn't even really know about this stuff 20 years ago. We did, but it was just on the fringe. It was just coming up. And I would say that all of you here are still technically outliers, because there's many, many billions of people in the world. And, you know, we've got 74 people on this call. So we're just starting to understand how important this stuff is. And this concept of being nervous to get back in our body, because of the way we have treated humans and the way we've been conditioned, it makes sense that we're nervous because we've been taught to not notice our body or to notice it too much, right? Depending on our history. So the key when we're nervous about getting into this work is to actually know that that's perfectly normal, nothing wrong with that, and to go slow. I'll use the word titration. This was a word that Peter Levine popularized from organic chemistry, and it's essentially just this ability to do little bits of work, little drops of work, and then let that settle, wait, and then do a little bit more and a little bit more. So for those of you that go into the 21 days, or any of my audios even that are, you know, on my site for free, if it's a 20-minute lesson and you can just only get through the first 2 minutes, that is better than nothing. That doesn't mean that you failed. It doesn't mean that you are broken. It's the same reason you couldn't ask an infant when they're new, I want you to read this entire chapter. They just can't yet. You might start by reading to them, or a toddler, right? It takes time to learn a new skill. And for many of us, we never got the regulation at the beginning. And so we're relearning something that we maybe never, ever got in the first place. Okay, next question here. Hello. Thank you for everything that you do. You're welcome. I'd like to ask, what are some definitive signs, early signs of our nervous system coming out of freeze? Great question. So first of all, I've got many videos on freeze and coming out of freeze, but and I'm going to say some things, but this does not mean that these are the exact same things that a person will experience, because it varies. It depends on what put the person into freeze in the first place. Was it a shock trauma? Was it an accident? Was it abuse? Was it verbal abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse? Was it sexual abuse? Was it surgical? Was it transgenerational? Was it in utero? So we also have to think about what created the freeze, because under that freeze is fight, flight, survival energy. Under that freeze is stored procedural, we call it procedural memory. It's a fancy word for the fight and the flee that you didn't get to do. So I'll use one example. Let's say you were held down as a child for a surgery. This happened to me when I was 5, and you couldn't fight. You couldn't get out. You were terrified. And so you shut down. In my case, it was a double whammy because I was sedated with pharmaceutical drugs pre-surgery. So not only can I not fight because I'm being held down by this stronger person, I'm also being given this toxin to put me under. And so the system is equally, or is even more unable to fight. So as we start to work at these deep layers of the nervous system, with the somatic systems, with the organ systems, with our focus on bringing more attention to the environment, all the things I teach, we might feel a little like, what? I want to fight. I feel agitated. I feel antsy. I want to just hit, or I want to scream. We might find that our legs are being restless. This is where restless leg syndrome can come in. It can be a deficiency in minerals, but it also can be a stored procedural traumatic memory of the running response getting stored in our system. We could feel in my case of my example, absolute terror. So if we're frozen, we actually don't feel necessarily the freeze, especially if we're functional, which most likely you are, because you're here and able to type and think and be clear in your statement. So if we've been in functional freeze for a whole lifetime, we might start to feel fear, real fear. We might start to sense, I don't really like these people, or I don't really feel safe here, or, oh my God, I'm feeling what we would quote unquote call anxiety. My heart is pounding for no reason. What is going on? Now, of course, there are dietary factors and all that kind of stuff connected to things like heart palpitations. But let's just say everything is great. Your labs are great. You've got all your minerals, all your vitamins in check, no toxins in your environment, and you're experiencing these symptoms that don't make any sense. This can be a sign of coming out of freeze. I would say one of the more classic signs is what we would call anxiety, panic, terror, anger, rage, irritation. Basically, these survival responses of fight, flight. So essentially, anxiety and panic are the sympathetic nervous system, fight, flight, just zooming up, right, and looking for danger. Other things that are other signs, that our nervous system is coming out of freeze: pain, physical pain. So as we start to loosen the armoring, So as our tissues, namely our fascia, some people say it fascia, I say fascia, muscles, as bones start to move differently, as joints start to open up, we can actually feel quite a bit of pain. We might feel a lot of cracking sensations. We might get headaches. Our digestion might go wonky because it's been in a lockdown for so long. And as we start to lift this strong break of this freeze response and probably quite a bit of shutdown, and in some cases, people are collapsed. That's what we see in more depressive states, is a biological collapse of not just the psyche, it's really within the somatic physiology. Listlessness, no energy, lethargy, stiffness, no flow. As that starts to lift, we will feel this armoring that has been there for some of us, maybe even before we were born. Maybe since we were, believe it or not, in utero or infants, where we were constantly in this state of cycling between danger and collapsing or freezing. Freeze, collapse. It goes first to freeze and then into collapse and shut down. So those are just some of the things that can be a signal that we're coming out of freeze. If I add a few more, we can get confused in our thinking. So words don't come out of our mouth the right way. We might get a little dizzy. We might feel disoriented. And again, if you think about it, if you were, let's say, in a really horrific accident and your body went into shock and then it never came out, it just kind of stayed in this low level freeze, functional freeze, along with the injuries or the concussion of, say, a car accident, just for example. As you start to lift that freeze, we will feel the disorientation that occurred at the moment of that accident, even if that accident was 50 years ago, right? 50 years ago. This is the same for surgical trauma, anesthesia trauma. Having worked with people within that realm and myself who has had many anesthesias due to my injuries and surgeries, you may even start to smell the scent of anesthesia coming out of the system. And that might seem crazy, but it's true. We believe there's some lines of thought, and this stuff is virtually impossible to study, but in learning and talking to mentors and colleagues, there's a thought that that anesthesia is either trapped in the fascia or in the cellular water within the cells. And so as we start to open up and start to get more flow into the system, it releases these toxins. It's the same reason when we are working with our body, maybe we're losing some fat cells, we're getting healthier, we will release the toxins in our fat cells because they like our fat cells. And that's where we might smell a little stinky or we might get a skin rash. These are signs of the system coming out of a shutdown response. So all this stuff relates to coming out of freeze. I've definitely not covered everything, but hopefully that's enough to get you started. Hello from Georgia. Hello, alum to SPSM, Norway, Sweden, Virginia, New England, Hudson Valley, New York. It's a beautiful area. Next question. Can I ask if the 21-day course is done on Zoom? No, it is not done on Zoom. So the 21-day nervous system tune-up, the one that's on sale today, it is all self-study in that the videos are already pre-recorded, the audios are pre-recorded, and you go through the pre-recorded content throughout the course at your own pace. So there is no one-on-one Zoom interaction or group Zoom interaction. It's very self-paced. It's an independent study course with the addition of our moderators that support it. Now, Smart Body, Smart Mind, this is my 12-week curriculum. There is Zoom on that one. I do training calls. My husband does Q&A calls. So there is more of that interactive support, and that is a much longer curriculum. Hello from Richmond. Okay, next question. I have been working regularly with a somatic experiencing and NARM practitioner for almost a year, and also been practicing a lot of work for myself. I also went to Feldenkrais group classes and one-on-one. Awesome. Do you think the 21 days will be worth it for me to join, or would you recommend SPSM directly? I I would recommend it. I would say that many of my students, even my colleagues, and even people who are high level in the health and healing world have gone through the 21 days and benefited. If anything, it's a way to practice regularly. It's a way to get a different viewpoint into working with your body in a self-paced way. Working with practitioners are amazing. Of course, I am a practitioner and I've worked with hundreds of people one-on-one, and I still go and see practitioners and I still do my own self-healing work. So it really comes down to your gut hit of, would I like more support? Would I like more to do? I also would say SBSM is the much more robust course. Now, just to give, because a lot of times people are like, what's the difference? For me, not for me, but the fact is SBSM was created first. So I created that curriculum first. It is the full curriculum, in my opinion, of going through all the methodologies that I am trained and practiced in, putting them all together. So somatic experiencing, Feldenkrais, and then the early trauma somatic regulation work of Kathy Kane and Stephen Terrell. These are my mentors that I've learned from. Of course, I then put all this together in my own unique way. SBSM has those three pieces. The 21-day nervous system tune-up has two of the pieces, the Feldenkrais and the somatic experiencing. So in 21 day, and this is all lined out on the site, we don't have time to get into the stress organs, working with the kidneys, the adrenals, the gut, the brainstem, the vagus nerve, anger, toxic shame. It doesn't mean that those aren't important, but just like anything that takes time, you need a foundation. And so the 21 days is that starter course foundation where you get education through my biology of stress videos, and then you get neurosensory exercises that just dip into, in very potent ways, working with the physiology, but also working with the skeleton, the movement, orienting, following impulse, containment, those sorts of things. So that's what I would recommend, is if you're wanting to add more and have more resource and support and more tools, start with the 21 day now. It is on sale. And then when SBSM starts up again, which is September, the cost, the full cost of the 21 days, which is just under $300, that is taken off of your SBSM tuition. So I'll say that one more time. So if you join the 21 days today at $197, if you choose to go on to my next curriculum, which is Smart Body, Smart Mind, this is the one that works with early trauma, anger, healthy shame, all those things. The full cost of the 21 days, which is $297, is taken off of the SBSM tuition. So essentially, by going into 21 day now, you're getting a discount, not just on the 21 days, but also on SBSM. I hope that answers that question. And yeah, I will say, and I said this and I've said it again, many of my colleagues who are more senior than me moved through SBSM and found benefit. Now, I think that's because, as far as I know, and maybe it's shifted, there are very few practitioners, if any, who are translating the somatic experiencing essence and the work of Kathy Kane and Stephen Terrell into verbal audio lessons that you can do in the comfort of your own home. Typically, to work with that level of trauma, somatic trauma practitioner specialist, you must work one-on-one or do Zoom sessions where they're guiding you into your body. And again, maybe there's others that have created these lessons since I created this over, gosh, it's been about 11 years, I think. It gives you the opportunity to learn how to do this work yourself. This doesn't mean that you wouldn't go see someone if you have something very specific that you want to work on, that you're having you're stuck on. But many of my students have gotten through so much of their healing and shifted so many, we can say, life sentence conditions by only going through these curriculums and doing the work. You have to do the work. You have to commit to it. You have to integrate it. You have to make it part of your lifestyle. I hope that answers that question. Okay. Oops, I zoomed down too far. There we go. Oh, hello, someone's from the Yukon. Thank you. Utah, Nova Scotia. Next question. Can we get so used to being in shutdown mode that we are not able to live and be in the present moment? I can't read today. Can we get so used to being in shutdown mode that we are not being able to live fully in present? 100%. How do we know when one has stepped out of it? I sort of answered that in one of those first questions. How do we know when we're coming out of freeze? So here's some telltale signs though. And what I'm going to say, just to make the playing field even here, a very large portion of our civilization here on Earth is living in some form of functional freeze, some form of shutdown, or the opposite, a high level activation and constant fear and terror, right? Or constant defense and armoring. It's just how it is. And I often say it's nobody's fault and it's everybody's fault. And by that, I mean our systems have set us up to need to stay defended, to need to stay shut down, to need to stay activated or always going. But as we start to do the work, and when I say the work, I mean the work that I have seen works really well through thousands and thousands of my students over many, many, many years, over a decade now, we might start to notice that our immune system seems healthier. We don't get as sick, or when we do, we recover faster. If we get a cut on our finger, it heals faster. That shows that our core physiological systems are stronger. We might find that our digestion is just smoothening out. Maybe we were someone who constantly had chronic constipation or diarrhea or a bit of both. And now we're noticing, wow, I'm actually getting better bowel movements. I'm not as bloated. I'm craving healthier foods. This is another massive issue right now in our current Western world, is we've been trained to crave processed foods. Now they're calling them ultra processed foods. We can't tell when something has pesticides on it because we're just so used to having food that has pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides on them. And so you start to notice, this doesn't taste right. This feels like poison. We start to notice who we are wanting to be around. We start to notice that we start setting more boundaries for ourselves. We might notice that we have a little more spark to get outside and move our body. We might start noticing that our sleep gets a bit better. Now, the thing with sleep is if we've been in a shutdown mode for our entire lives, the common thing I hear is I go to sleep and I'm out like a light. I don't even remember being in bed, and I wake up and I'm kind of disoriented. That's a sign of some pretty strong functional freeze and shutdown. As we get out of that shutdown, we might find that our sleep is a bit disturbed. And that's because we don't have this strong blanket of shutdown survival physiology on us. That's a metaphor, but it's like a blanket. It starts to lift off, and we start to feel maybe a little more vulnerable, maybe a little more raw. We kind of hear the crack in the corner and we're like, what's that? So when we come out of shutdown, what often happens is we start to notice startle responses more. We start to notice a bit more jumpiness. That's just our system being a bit raw and a little clunky and clumsy as we lift this shutdown response off. And one could also say, as we get more regulated, because that's what's happening, as we get out of shutdown, we get more regulated, things just feel a little easier. We don't feel the need to defend as much or to protect as much. Our spider senses, our gut sense becomes sharper. More alignment starts to occur. Things start happening in our life that are easier. But if we're constantly, again, in this defensive shutdown, or activation mode, in my experience personally, and seeing people in the world, whether it's personal friends or students or clients, life is tough when we're constantly in a state of dysregulation. Life gets easier and we can handle more, and we have more capacity when we have regulation. Someone asked, please mention something about working with the stress organs. Can I work with a diseased body organ? 100%. I can't teach that in this moment right now because I don't know your history, your context, but this is what we get into in Smart Body, Smart Mind. And, of course, it depends. I can't give medical advice. I can't consult, but I do know, having worked with many people, that organs start to improve. But our organs, unless there's some true genetic defect or there's something functionally wrong, like a valve didn't get properly created when we were in utero, or some kind of internal injury happened or shock trauma. But let's just say an organ is not well because of all the things: stress, lifestyle, toxins, pharmaceutical damage, all these sorts of things. I have seen and I know that our system, when we get it out of dysregulation, nervous system dysregulation, and we feed it the right stuff, we get out into the environment, we get sunshine on our skin, we get our feet on the bare earth, we remove toxins from our body, toxic people, and we have a practice that's integrated. The system wants to be well. The organs want to be well. They don't want to be diseased and unwell. But this goes back to what I said a little while ago. We've been conditioned and we've been bombarded with so many things that aren't good for us that we don't even realize they're not good for us. It's that classic image of the fish being in a fish tank and not realizing that the water is poisonous because it's just been in it the whole time. We're kind of in that situation right now with humanity. So next question, can I buy the course and not start right away? 100%. 100%. You can get the deal today and start it next week or next month. I don't recommend waiting too long, but yeah, there's nothing, we are not watching you, seeing if you're doing it or not doing it. We're not going to send you an email if we see that you haven't, started the course. We don't track that stuff specifically. So of course you can start it when it suits you. What is the difference between experiencing symptoms in crisis versus experiencing a trauma release, going through an old layer of trauma, coming up and out, and eventually integrating? Practice. So this is a tough one because it's something I have experienced personally, where it's like, is this something that I've been exposed to, or is this an old layer coming up? And sometimes you don't know, I'll be really honest. But sometimes you do know because the core part of you is still feeling robust and strong. Like you have energy, you have clarity in your mind, but I feel a little swollen today and I haven't eaten anything differently. I've actually been eating really clean. This is something I've been experiencing myself the last week or so. It's like, this isn't something I have done. This is old stuff, and it's coming up and it's uncomfortable, but the rest of me feels okay. So that's one way, this is a question from Dory, to know if it's an old layer coming up. Pain, like let's say you haven't worked out, you haven't done anything, you haven't bonked your head or your elbow, and you wake up the next day and you're like, why am I sore there, right? That can be a sign that there is an old somatic symptom coming up and out. So this is how we kind of discern, and it comes back to self-knowledge and knowing yourself. Of course, if you eat like crap and for one day or 1 week and you're like, oh, I just feel so heavy and not good, and I haven't gotten outside, I've been sitting in front of my computer for too long, then that might be symptoms of the moment because you haven't been treating your body well. So it's all about trial and error, knowing yourself, and also understanding what the layers of trauma might look like. And it's going to look different for each person. Not everybody's going to get a shaking response when they heal their trauma. Not everybody's going to get a rash. Not everybody's going to get some chronic pain symptom or syndrome. It just might be that there's a feeling of absolute terror and helplessness, and it comes out of nowhere. And it's like, what is this? And the thing is we don't remember typically our pre-verbal experiences from in utero to age 3, even usually longer. And so we have to just trust there's nothing strange in my environment that would make me need to go into this panic, fear, terror response. This has to be something that I don't remember from my infancy or childhood, or even the history of my ancestors. That will also come up. This is where transgenerational or intergenerational trauma comes from. Also past life trauma. I've talked about this before. In my opinion, it's a real thing. I've seen enough evidence. I've experienced myself. So this is, again, all these things are there, but it comes down to, can you listen to your body? And can you work with it and be with it as these things move through? Hey, Katina. Thank you for the raving good review here. You said, you cannot put a price on your health or healing your nervous system. I highly recommend this course. And no, Irene didn't ask me to write this. I purchased this and I'm so glad I did. Thank you. Next question. Can daydreaming become an unhealthy coping mechanism? It sure can. Some of my clients that I worked with who had severe attachment wounds, man, they could daydream. They had multicolor things going on. Their visualization tactics were insane. And it was clear that it was a way of coping internally because the outside was just too chaotic. So 100%. Next question from Anne. Is this suited for complex PTSD and a complete functional freeze? Been on a healing journey for a long time. Nervous system work is the missing key. 100%. I can't quote the exact stats, but I would say the bulk of our students that go through both the 21-day nervous system tune-up and Smart Body, Smart Mind are in some ways on that spectrum of complex PTSD, functional freeze, you name the things, they're in it because of these things. And remember, complex PTSD is, I hate to say this, but simply a result of the nervous system being in this dysregulated state, this fight, flight, and freeze, collapse, shutdown being the prominent way that the physiology knows how to work. And then depending on lifestyle, predisposition, like just what we do with our bodies, some of us will display symptoms that look like bowel problems, some will have autoimmune problems, some will have more psyche, what we would call mental disorders. But this is just not me saying this. This is the predecessors who have really popularized a lot of this work in the more academic world and popular press world, the Gabor Matés, the Bessel van der Kolks, the people who do research. They also say this all comes back to our early days and what happened to us, and was it regulating? Were we co-regulated with in a safe, secure, and attached way? Or was mom out to lunch? Was dad out to lunch? Was there violence in the house? Was there not enough money in the bank? Was there no food? Were they dealing with their own traumas from their past that they didn't even know they had, right? This is, I think, where we're in this really interesting time, because most of our parents, bless them, they had no clue that they had survival stress in their system. They just knew they had a temper, or they just knew they had to drink a lot, or they had to do this, or whatever it might be. And this all can be traced back to the nervous system being dysregulated. Oh, yeah. So Sonia's question is, can intermittent fasting provoke a threat response in the body? 100%. I have seen it also as a vagus nerve toning strategy. Thank you. Yeah, my good friend, Sarah Kleiner, she and I actually did a talk on Instagram just today, and she's going to post that on YouTube, about the connection between autoimmune and the nervous system. She is someone to follow to understand the right way to intermittent fast. But essentially, if we are not eating long enough, and if our system is not regulated, and I'm being very general here, the system will see it as a threat. There is no nutrition coming in. I need blood sugar for my brain and organs. This is a threat response. And so what I have seen, and Sarah would back me up on here, is we've gotten into this, it's one of the biohacks, and I'm not saying that intermittent fasting cannot be good in certain therapeutic instances, but what often happens is a person wakes up, they're not hungry, which shows that their cortisol is off. They drink coffee, they get a push because there's maybe, not maybe, the caffeine. I got nothing against caffeine. But if that's all we're consuming for the first 5 hours of the day, it puts us into a survival response. And then we wait to eat until we're starving. And what's happening is the body is essentially in this cycle of starvation. Now, I've learned through Sarah that we actually should, if we want to fast, do it in the evening. We want to have good protein and fat in the morning, have balanced food throughout the day. And if we do want to fast, we do it before bed so that when we go to sleep, there's a higher level of melatonin. We have more what's called autophagy, which is where our cells clean themselves out. So that's kind of the trend I'm seeing that's shifting. I fell into this trap for a while and it wrecked my hormones. And what I've found is that since shifting and going to more the route that we're seeing is a bit more stabilizing and a bit more regulated, there's just more energy throughout the day. So 100% it can provoke a threat response. That being said, we want our body to be able to burn fat. So that's what intermittent fasting is essentially trying to teach our body, is to pull from our fat stores. But for some people, they don't have any fat stores extra. And for some, they have excess and it still doesn't do anything. So again, like I said, follow Sarah Kleiner Wellness. She has got tons of information on this. Nutrition was actually one of my first studies along with fitness. So this is something I'm familiar with. I just don't focus on her that much anymore because people like Sarah are a bit more up to date with the research. Can you come out of freeze by just leaving an unhealthy relationship? 100%. This comes back to the last question is if someone was in an unhealthy relationship, that's a threat. You become so used to it that you don't realize it's a threat. And then when it's gone, it's like the system lets down. And so another sign of coming out of freeze, we might get sick. So when we're in a constant threat response, even if it's low level and we're not aware of it, we're going to use our stress hormones to keep ourselves healthy, quote unquote. This is where cortisol comes in. This is where it connects with, if you have, I don't recommend this, but if there's like an inflammation in the body and you go to a medical practitioner, what do they sometimes do? They give you steroids. It's a corticosteroid. Cortisol takes the inflammation down. So when we are in a constant state of stress, we don't realize it, but we're pumping out these little doses of cortisol to keep us in check. We then get out of that threat response, and the system goes, holy cow, I don't need to mount a stress response anymore. I'm going to drop everything. And then the immune system is like, oh, thank God. And then it becomes a little more vulnerable, and then we might get sick, the quote unquote cold. There's more to it than that, but that's a general version of what not only coming out of an unhealthy relationship might look like and how that impacts our system, but what might happen when we come out of freeze. Yeah, the other thing, classic, when I know I know when something's missing, when they pride themselves on never feeling low energy, or they're like, oh, I never get sick, or nothing ever happens to me. And of course, we don't want to get sick a lot of the time, but having a fever, having those sorts of things, it actually can also boost our system. So it's like this fine balance of, being able to have a system that can respond and adapt appropriately. Okay. What do you think about the stellate ganglion block for PTSD and complex PTSD? It's supposed to calm down the sympathetic nervous system. I can't speak to this professionally. I've heard about it, so I can't say specifics. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But if I go one step further, we want to learn how to regulate our own nervous system ourselves, in the way that we should have learned from our primary caregivers when we were young, but we maybe didn't get, right? They teach us self-regulation through co-regulation. If we didn't get it, We want to build that back up. That's what neuroplasticity offers us, the ability to build back up. Neuroplasticity is also why we have addictions and why we have complex PTSD, and we get stuck in these wired habits and behaviors and physiological grooves. So we can use something to help take the edge off. There's nothing wrong with that. And what can we do to support the nervous system ourselves so that we don't need to constantly need these things? I know of people who have had, chronic back pain for years, and they rely on getting certain injections, for example, and it helps in the interim, but do you want to always have to rely on that, right? I think that's something to consider too. Okay, next question from Anne. What kind of support does one need when coming out of functional freeze? I'm a single mom to a 4-year-old and I need to function. When is it a good time to do this kind of work? That's a great and tricky question, Anne. So I would say, how can you get into this work and do just little bits? Because I will say, and I've said this before in classes, if you are in charge of, responsible for a little person who is dependent on you and you're a single mom, you can't just take off and not feed your kid for a week, right? So that you can rest. So you need to find ways to strategize and be creative so that you can do little bits of the work. And the cool thing, though, is that when you start to do your work, the work and the connection with your 4-year-old will get easier. It will improve and it will become less of a stress. I really recommend, if you haven't done our parenting masterclass, to check that out. We're going to do another one next week. But give yourself some grace to know this might take some time. It took me close to 25 years to come out of my functional freeze. The first sort of 12 years, I wasn't aware that I was working on it. And it's only really in the last, say, 8 years that it's been a bit more specific, and only in the last 5 years that it's been more specific. And I've done videos on this. But you have to design your world based on what you have support, where you have support. How can you find some kind of extra support? Even if you have another family that can help with your kiddo, even if it's for an hour a week, right? How can you find ways to have food prepared for you? And I don't mean like have a private chef or anything like that. Something where something can help you with the daily domestic things that hopefully doesn't break the bank, but also gives you some space. And by space, again, like I said, it's not, I need a week off. It's like space that's 30 minutes a day. The other thing that I'll add is, as you start to learn about your nervous system and as you start to work with it, you will work with your nervous system even when you're constantly in mom mode. And that is where you integrate the work, and that's where the work explodes in a good way. I hope that answers your question. But I will also say, we have had many, many moms and dads and many single parents go through this, and they find a way. They find a way. Okay. All right, Chantel asks, I have a question. When working with terror, is it ever a bad time to start the work? For example, if you're doing the work less for you and more to lessen the impact of your symptoms on those close to you. I think part of me wants to heal, but I feel such terror when I connect to my body that I find I'm pushing against that to do the work. So there's probably more context I need to know for this, Chantal, but what I'll say is there are some times where we might not want to do this work, but I often say those are if we're like literally in a war-torn zone where we are literally fighting and like we cannot find any safety. That being said, last fall, I got a DM. I haven't shared this before. I got a DM from someone who was in a bomb shelter in Israel, and they follow me. And they said, thank you so much for just continuing to post your work and your resources. I'm finding myself getting pulled into victim mode. And one could say they had every right to be in victim mode because they're in a bomb shelter. But they're like, I'm noticing that by just noticing my body on the ground in here and orienting to the good that's around me, I'm staying more regulated. So I share that with everyone here because even in this case that I often say, I wouldn't do this work if you're like literally in a war zone. Here's someone who is doing little bits of this work and they are in a literal war zone. So I think that it all comes down to you and what you're up for and making it small. There's this thought that we have to like do everything and rip off the Band-Aid and get it all done in one moment. And that's not necessarily true. So is there a perfect time to do this work? One could say, no, there isn't. It comes down to you feeling the pull to want to do it. I hope that answers your question. And the other thing, when you say, I feel such terror when I connect to my body, I don't want to make any assumptions, Chantel, but my sense is you maybe haven't started with what I teach and how I teach it. I'm not sure. But sometimes we don't want to start with the body. This is where this whole language of we have to get in and do somatic exercises is not the whole picture. For some of us, we have to get into the environment. For some of us, we have to get into just being with our mind in a better way while getting into the environment. Maybe it's not feeling our body, but just feeling the ground under us in a more curious way. We don't want to do this version of like exposure therapy, which can be very popular in the psychology worlds, because that can put us into more chaos, more shutdown. Oh, hey, Monica, another student. I recommend the 21-day tune-up. I'm on day 15. I'm still on day 15, but I already see how my body is more balanced. I hear my body in a new way. Thank you so much for that comment. Yes, it's powerful when we get into this stuff in a way that goes layered by layer with education, practice, integration. Education, practice, integration. We need all three. It's not just about doing the exercises, and it's not just about getting theory, it's about connecting it. Hello from Slovenia. Hello. Next question. Would the 21-day course help with long COVID? I have many symptoms, but one of the most troubling is tightness and weakness in my torso and epigastric area. This seems to be worse when I'm stressed. Yes, so we've had a few people have said, I actually think we have something somewhere. Someone wrote us up a thing, and I think it was someone in our Smart Body, Smart Mind course that said that going through that curriculum was the only thing that helped their long COVID in the end. And while I am not totally versed on all the things with this long COVID and long vaccine, we're calling them these two things now, what I've seen, and I can't quote research on this, but from what I've seen, there is an energy crisis in the body. The mitochondria is severely being affected, as is the blood vessels, the vasculature. We're seeing people with POTS, we're seeing people with dizziness, with heart palpitations, and this general fatigue, but also anxiety, which connects to dysregulation of the nervous system. So in many ways, what we're seeing is a mass global dysregulation of the nervous system and cellular health. And so we want to reteach our body how to not feel like it's being threatened. And so what we've seen is this thing that we call COVID is massively threatening the system. It is creating all sorts of troubles, inflammatory problems, energy crisis problems, dysregulation problems. So what's the solution, other than, of course, doing as much as we can to detox from this, is work with our autonomic nervous system and get it healthy again. I know I've mentioned Sarah Kleiner. I'll also mention her again. This is where the circadian biology, getting outside, sunlight, grounding, electrons is so important. I have a whole YouTube playlist on these topics, so be sure to check that out. And good luck. Keep healing. Yeah. So the 21 days I mentioned, if you get into the 21 days, you will get a $300 discount from SBSM. That applies to whether you do SBSM in the fall or next year. So yeah, it carries on. Yes, fainting is definitely a sign of nervous system dysregulation. And can somatic therapy help? 100%. Depends on the kind of somatic therapy. I don't like using that term anymore because there's so many different kinds of therapies out there that are really hard to discern whether they're getting into the actual regulation of the nervous system. But yeah, fainting is the system going into essentially a shutdown response. The blood pressure is not matching up to what the system's needs are. And at the end of the day, our body is protecting our brain. So if it feels there can't be enough blood shunted up into the vasculature for our coronary art, or not coronary, our brain arteries, our cranial nerves, all those things, the system will say, shut down, pass out, right? So yeah, that's exactly what happens. Oh, wow. Marin, hi. Hey, yes, of course I remember you. Yeah, you did Stress Less, Sense More. How is this 21-day program different? I would say, I can't remember everything that was in that first course. There's parts that are there, but it's a little more robust. So yes, it will offer you, most likely, I'd have to check, but more of the same and more Feldenkrais lessons and more of the SE components. So I'd have to go back and look. That was so long ago, but it's good to see your name pop up. If you want to send us an email to support, we can double check that. And yeah, but thank you. Good to see you. Okay, I'm going to have to pop off soon here, everybody. Yeah, so someone's asking about mold. I'm not familiar with the work that you're mentioning here, Dr. Richie Shoemaker, but how trauma intersects with trauma, with mold, recovery from trauma, and toxic mold illness. I'm not a mold expert. I do know it is nasty and it can really impact us. And I also know when our immune system is strong, because of a regulated nervous system, we are able to handle and process toxins a lot more. That being said, some things are just too much, right? That our system will be impacted. The other thing I've seen is that when people are in a pretty deep shutdown and freeze, they're not even aware that there's toxins in their environment. And so that's another thing. When we have more regulation, we will become more sensitive to toxins like mold, chemicals, etc. But I'm around some people where I'll say, "Can't you smell that detergent?" And they smell it and they have no sense of smell for it. And I'm like, "Holy cow! How can you not smell that?" And again, their system is desensitized, most likely to chronic exposure to this. So this is another sign that we're maybe coming out of freeze. We become more sensitive to fragrance, scent, toxins, things like mold. Will this program be helpful for burnout? 100%. Burnout, essentially, as we're seeing, is the system in a dysregulated state, and we are pushing, and we don't know how to stop, right? There's no signaling mechanism that says pause. And then for some of us, when we pause, we freak out because the only way that we feel safe is if we're constantly going. So it's a bit of an interesting back and forth when we're learning how to regulate our nervous system, and we are coming from a place of burnout and going all the time. I actually did a very long article on the 2 stages of adrenal fatigue. Just look up 2 stages of adrenal fatigue and my name and you'll find it. And it's a long form article that spells out the stages of adrenal fatigue, burnout. But it's all connected. Sarah Kleiner, Kleiner. That's the person I keep mentioning. Someone asked, what I'm thinking is you have to be on oxygen 24 hours a day. Probably some respiratory thing that you're going through. Is that a hindering issue? My sense is you're asking to do the course, and I would say no. There are ways that you can adapt. The education you can take in, like you're taking in this, and it's all about reconnecting to this physiology. So this is where, if you have questions, if you do enter the course, to ask questions of my support team and my moderators. Do we get individual attention in SBSM? Not direct coaching, no. Do you get individual responses to your questions? Yes, that happens in our forums. All right, let's see if I can get to a couple more. Someone's asking me, what are the difference between the neurosensory exercises that I teach and breathwork practices? I can't compare them because they're not in the same league. To me, breathwork practices have a time and a place. I've used them myself, but they, from my experience and my students' experience, they do not teach how to restore actual regulation. They are good therapeutically for building lung capacity, building breath capacity, getting better at high CO2 levels, which for some people can throw people into a panic. So there's utility in that. But I always say it like this. If you have a baby that is not able to self-regulate because they can't self-regulate, they need co-regulation through attachment, attunement, connection, safety. If a baby is crying, you can't ask them to do a breathwork exercise to calm down. If mom is anxious and she does a breathwork exercise, that doesn't necessarily mean that she can connect with her baby. She has to be regulated at the cellular level to attune and attach. So what this means is breathwork has a time and a place, but it is not for teaching this deep, deep self-regulation that is what I'm all about in my courses and classes. So this is how they're different. I don't like to compare because they're completely in two different leagues, but I always go back to the baby. You couldn't get a baby to do a breathwork exercise if they are crying. You need to hold them. You need to attune to them and find out what is going on. What do they need help with? That is essentially what you are teaching yourself in my courses and programs throughout the 21 days into SBSM. You're learning how to attune to yourself and then follow your biological impulses so that you can do what you need to bring yourself into more regulation and or release the traumas that are stored in your body and or grow capacity. And that's the name of the game, is growing capacity. When we grow our capacity to be in our body and listen and attune to ourselves and to the environment, and at the same time, environment, attunement to self, all at the same time, notice our sensations, act on them, all these things. This is what creates regulation. As we gain regulation, this is when the traumas start to release. It's very different than what a lot of other people say, which is, let's work on the trauma release. Let's work on the emotions. Someone asked about emotion code. Let's work on managing. There's nothing wrong with those things. They help a lot of people. They've helped myself in the past, but this comes down to, what are you doing to restore that regulation to your system at this core level? So I know there's a few more questions here, but I do have to end this call. I've got more calls, but I'm hoping that as I look through some of these other questions, I've answered them in this in terms of restoring baseline regulation. When we restore baseline regulation, things start to shift. We don't dissociate as much. We're not panicking as much. We're not constantly in what we would call this ADD world of just constant hypervigilance and not being able to focus. When our nervous system is not in good regulation, everything else suffers. So I hope this has been useful. Like I said at the very beginning of this talk, today is a sale for my 21-day nervous system tune-up. If you have no idea what that is, today is the day to learn about it and to get in, to become a member and start the work when it suits you. As I said before, you don't have to start it today. You can start it tomorrow or next week. There's support within our program. And I will be popping on Facebook to do another live Q&A at 3 p.m. And then Instagram, I'm going to be doing one at 7 p.m. And if you have any logistical questions, just send us an email to support@irenelyon.com, and my team can help answer your questions. There's also an FAQ page, I believe, on the site that has answers to these questions, a lot of commonly asked questions. The other thing, if you have a question about a specific thing, type it into YouTube here and my name, and chances are something will pop up. Okay, thank you, everyone. Bye for now.